We have two amazing. I am so excited. We have two amazing speakers today. We have Michael Maschke from Sensi, and we have Dan Gray from Cooper Ginsberg and Gray. Michael Maschke is the Chief Executive Officer at Sensi Enterprises. He holds a degree in telecommunications from James Madison University. He is an NCASE certified examiner, a certified computer examiner, a certified ethical hacker, an access data certified examiner, and a certified information systems security professional. He is an associate member of the American Bar Association, and he has spoken at the ABA's Tech Show conference on the subject of cybersecurity. He is currently an active member of the ABA's Law Practice Division, Technology Core Group, and is on the Fairfax Law Foundation Board of Directors. Mr. Maschke is a 2019 Fast Case 50 Award recipient. He is also the co-author of Information Security for Lawyers and Law Firms, a book published by the ABA in 2006, and the 2008 to 2020 Solo and Small Law Firm Technology Guides. If you don't know Mr. Maschke or haven't had any exposure to him, you're missing out. He has a lot of knowledge regarding technology, and in your cases, he's an amazing resource. Dan Gray is also going to be doing a majority of the presentation today. He is a principal at Cooper Ginsberg and Gray. If you haven't met Dan Gray personally, I would tell you you're missing out. I'm going to talk about all the wonderful things he's done, but he truly is a professional and someone to admire in our legal community and as a family law attorney. He not only practices in Virginia, but also in Maryland and in DC. He is the current president of the Virginia chapter of the American Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers. He's chairman of the Virginia Family Law Coalition, which advises the General Assembly on family law legislation. He's a former chairman of the Virginia State Bar Family Law Section Board, and he served as the chairman of the Fairfax Bar Association Family Law Section for many years. He is the business logic advisor for the VADER program and ensures that the program accurately reflects the Virginia law. So Dan has a lot of hats, and I'm so excited to have you here today, Dan. So I would tell you, I believe, Dan, you're going to start. Is that true?
That is true, Donna, and good morning to you, and good morning to the Prince William County Bar Association. That was a very nice introduction, and I know I speak for Mike and myself and say that you were way too generous in your in your intros, but we'll take
Absolutely.
it. So we are going to talk about VADER today, and I do tend to dominate and buffalo my way through the presentation, so I want to give my colleague Mike an opportunity to put out there anything that he really wants you all to know on the front end. I mean, I'm going to invite Mike to make comments as we go through. I'll be drawing on him for some information as we make our way through the presentation. But Mike, is there anything that you wanted to tell the folks at the outset?
I would just like to say that, we thank each and every one of you that have signed up for VADER, and Dan and I, we try our best to respond as soon as possible as we get those support inquiries. If you do have any questions on how to use the website, or if you have a legal question, I just want to let you know that when you do send that email to support, that myself and some of my colleagues here at Sensei immediately get that. And if it's a legal question, we forward it on to Dan, who's over the years has provided countless hours providing support to our users. So we just want to thank you.
Well, and picking up on that point, Mike, I do get a couple of times a week inquiries from VADER users, and the vast majority of the time, the inquiries tend not to be about the technical aspects of VADER. It's about, honestly, how to apply the child support guidelines to a given set of facts. When you have technical issues, Mike and the Sensei team, they hop on that right away. And if it's a legal issue, they email me, and then I do my best to get back to you within 24 hours with an answer. And I regret that I can't be quicker about it, but it's just the nature of practice that, I have to kind of set aside time to go over that. And like I said, most of the questions that the users have, I usually answer them by opening up the code, and we just kind of walk through it together over the phone and get to the answer. So the program itself, there are some bugs in it that we're still finding every now and again. But by and large, the program is, since we migrated it online, it's operating as it should. And I'll point out a couple things that you're going to want to be wary of as you're going through it. So Donna gave a good overview of sort of my extracurricular activities, and I am the chairman of the Virginia Family Law Coalition. And what that coalition does is advises the legislature every session on pending family law matters. And so I do have a good line on sort of what's coming down the pike, and we can try to be responsive in the VADER software. Like we were able to push out when we adopted statewide guidelines for pendente lite spousal support in both juvenile court and circuit court. We were able to make those changes fairly quickly. And there are a couple other things that are coming down the pike that I'll go over as we go through. Okay, so what is VADER? I mean, I hope that most of you know what it is. It's an online program, and people use it for a variety of reasons. The number one reason that people use the program is to run the child support and spousal support guidelines. That's your biggest use. Another use, a secondary use, not quite as popular, but people use it quite a bit, is its tracing function. VADER allows you to figure out the separate, the marital, and the hybrid portions of property accumulated during the marriage. And then the third reason people use VADER is for presentation purposes. Like you can enter information, and VADER won't necessarily do any calculations for you, but it will allow you to organize your case file and organize your exhibits for trial. So we'll go through each of those, but I'm going to spend most of my time talking about the guidelines. All right, I'm going to attempt to do some magic and share my screen with you. And I should add before I do that, if anybody has questions at any time, please feel free. And I don't know, we didn't talk before we got started, but Mike, if you see any questions pop up, feel free to interrupt me. Donna, you please feel free to do the same. I want this to be useful to everybody. So if I'm spending too much time on something or not enough time on it, just let me know, and we can spend as much time as you want. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to take you to the first page. Hopefully you can all see the VADER login screen on your screens. Donna, we looking good? Thumbs up. Okay. All right, so if you've signed up for VADER, then you should have a username, and I'm going to enter mine. And you should also enter your password. And then once you do that, VADER is going to send you a text as an additional security measure to log in. So as you can see, I've got my cell phone here. I've got a text from VADER. I'm going to enter my number. 72310, and then submit, and we're off. Okay, so I'm just going to move some things around on my screen so that I can see better here. All right, so this brings you to what they call the home page or the dashboard for VADER Online. You can see that I'm logged in here as myself. If I needed to, I could reset my password. If you have responsibility for administering VADER within your firm, if you click on admin, that gives you control over the users at your firm. And for example, in my firm, it gives us a list of who's using it. and you can make changes to that as you go. Okay, so let's go back home. All right, there's an online news portion at the top, and that tells you that we are actually involved in a Prince William County Bar Association VADER training, and you can register for it. So you can look for online news there. All right, so when you see this page, you've got three basic options. You can start a new case, you can start entering in new information, set up a brand new file, or you can upload an old case. And I've got to move some things around on my screen here so that I can see. And uploading an old case that you have previously saved, you hit choose file. And the one thing I want to make clear about this is when you're saving directly from VADER or you're uploading, my particular computer, the one that I use, the way it's set up is that it automatically takes me to the downloads file. So when I'm working on something and I want to save it, I'll download the case and it'll go automatically to my downloads. It does not go automatically into my firm file sharing system, okay? And if I want to get access to something and work on it, the way my computer is set up, I can't pull it directly from, like in my firm, we use World Docs. I can't pull it directly from World Docs. Now, those of you who are more computer savvy may be able to do that, but everything that I work on in VADER is saved to my downloads file. And Mike and I talked, and I don't know if he's going to be able to easily demonstrate it, and I'll defer to him on this. But when you want to save VADER information that you've been working on to your firm's document management system, I find that the easiest thing to do, if your computer is not otherwise set up this way, is to just email it to yourself. And go into your email, create an email, attach a file, and then access your downloads. And your VADER information should be there. And like in my case, I just email it to myself. And then I open it from email and then save it into my firm's document management system. Now, if I'm on the other end, if I'm getting ready to do further work on a VADER file that I previously saved, I just do it in reverse. I go into my email, I attach the document directly from World Docs, email it to myself, push it into the downloads file, and then it's available for me to upload. Okay, so
Hey, Dan?
yes,
Dan,
Mike.
we got a question from Roy Baldwin. Can you go up
Yes.
to the admin section there?
Yes.
And then to users?
Yes.
And then list?
Yeah. All right, bear with me 1 second.
So let's see here once this loads. So Roy, your question is, you have 4 users for your firm. Each user should be using their own separate username and password. And as you can see here under the action section on the right-hand side, if those users have the 2-factor authentication set up for mobile, they want to put on their own cell phone number and not your cell phone number. That would be why you are getting the text messages with the codes when they are logging in. For those users that don't have cell phones, which would be, I would imagine, infrequent, there is a Chrome or Firefox add-on that you can install and use Google Authenticator, which is the second 2-factor authentication. So what I'd recommend, Roy, is that the user, the administrator for your firm, go into this list of your users and select the Reset 2FA option. That way, the next time that user logs into the website, they will be able to set up the 2-factor authentication at that time. Thanks, Dan.
Oh, sure thing. All right, so we go back home, and again, we're faced with 3 options. Start a new case, upload an old case, or if you just want to run some quick numbers, if your client is in the office and you want to do a quick and dirty, all right, give me the incomes, I want to give you a range, you hit new case and then quick consult. Normally what you have to do when you're starting VADER is fill in all of this information on the left, But if you want to just get to the numbers real quick, you can do a quick consult. So you hit that button, your case file is ready, the name of the file is quick consult, and then you've got full access to all the different forms that are on the left-hand side of your dashboard. So let's continue with that, and we're gonna click on support. Our most popular guideline, the one that most of us use, is the combined support guideline, and that is your typical, now statewide, pendente lite spousal support and child support guideline. That is now presumptive in every juvenile court and in every circuit court in Virginia. It didn't used to be that way. We changed that when we changed the spousal support guidelines to reflect the fact that spousal support is no longer deductible by the payor or taxable to the payee. Now, one important note, on your left-hand side, you see down here this C9 support button. That is the Ninth Circuit's Tidewater areas pendente lite child and spousal support guideline. And what the Ninth Circuit does, it's very inventive. They allow for what they call a debt adjustment. You know, the normal guideline variables are gross incomes of the parties, you know, how many kids do you have? What are the health insurance costs? What are the daycare expenses? You plug in all that information, the guideline spits out a number, and there it is. What the Ninth Circuit does is it takes into account the costs that you're paying for housing, and I think it also takes into account the costs that you are paying for, I think it's consumer debt and auto expense. Let me just see here. Yeah, they adjust for home rent or mortgage, car payments, or other family debt. Now, the reason I'm talking about this is I have used this guideline in Northern Virginia to argue that, look, if you just run the guidelines, my client, because he's paying the mortgage or because he's making all these car payments, he's not going to be able to meet the guideline amount. So I want you to consider the debt, and let me tell you what the Ninth Circuit does. Now, the big question, and the reason I'm spending time on this is, all right, now we have a statewide guideline, and the statewide guideline applies in every circuit court and every juvenile court. Can the Ninth Circuit continue to use this debt adjustment and still be in conformity with the code? And I've been talking with lawyers down there, and Kenny Mirov is one. Those of you who know Kenny, he's very involved in the local bar. And we just got word that at least one judge of the Ninth Circuit will use this Ninth Circuit guideline. And the point of all this is to say, we have in every other guideline, you have the option of using the old guidelines or the new guidelines, with the exception of the Ninth Circuit. We did not update the Ninth Circuit because we were waiting to hear how they were going to deal with this debt adjustment. Just earlier this week, we got word that they are going to continue to use this. So we will be working on updating this particular support guideline. Now, back to what we were talking about earlier. So we're using our combined support guideline. Let's just give it a moment to load there. All right, now what is this version 1, version 2 business up here? Okay, you want to make sure that the version 2 is highlighted, because that is going to give you the most current version of the spousal support and child support guidelines. Why do we still have version 1, which is the old guidelines? Well, when we made the update, we thought, well, there could be cases where, for whatever reason, you were going to need access to the old guidelines. Maybe you were going to try to figure out an arrearage amount or something like that. You know, there might be some reason. You know, normally the guidelines stay current. You apply the most current guidelines at the time the court is ruling on a particular support issue. But we wanted to keep that version 1 there just on the off chance that you might need it. But what's ended up happening is that some people mistakenly click on that version 1. So when you're using this, make sure that version 2 is highlighted. Okay, bear in mind, these guidelines are presumptive, but they are only presumptive up to a combined gross income of $10,000 per month. And so a lot of times you go to court and the other side is arguing on where a payor is earning $20,000, $25,000 a month. Well, you got to apply the guideline. Well, no, actually the guideline is only presumptive up to that $10,000 limit. When we updated the spousal support guidelines, we made sure that that $10,000 presumptive limitation remained in there. So don't forget about that. One other additional sort of finer point on incomes. I think for the years that I've been practicing, we have a lot of people in Northern Virginia that have more than one piece of real estate, and a lot of people rent out those properties. And so rental income has to be considered in gross income when you're using the guidelines. And what we always thought, or at least most of us anyway, was that in determining what the rental income was to be put into the guideline worksheet, you could deduct the mortgage payments. And honestly, some people even have deducted the HOA or taxes or other expenses related to maintaining that rental property. Well, there's an unreported Court of Appeals case that came out recently, Ellis versus Sutton Ellis, which states that under the plain language of the statute, and this was a situation where the father was saying, hey, yeah, I get gross rental income, but I have all these other expenses associated with maintaining that property. You have to reduce the gross income and use the net. Well, the court said mortgage payments are not appropriate, reasonable business expenses relevant for deduction. Father was not self-employed, nor in a partnership, nor was he in a closely held business. Simply put, the circuit court did not err by failing to deduct his mortgage payments from his rental income because the statute does not allow it to do so. So that's unreported. There are unreported cases that seem to suggest otherwise, but just I put that out there as a word to the wise. We do deal with rental income quite a bit. Now we've got some differing instruction from the Court of Appeals about whether you can deduct those mortgage payments or other expenses related to that income. Okay, so back to the worksheets. I keep running my mouth here. All right, full screen button, be aware of that. If this is too tiny for you to see, you can always press that full screen button and get rid of the dashboard to your left. Now that gives you a nice full screen view. Where do we typically start? I like to start when I'm running guidelines with the basic information page. You have access to all the different guidelines here. But if you put in the information in the basic information page, it's going to carry through to all of these other guidelines. So let's go to the basic information page. Okay. And the other thing I like about it is that the basic information page allows you to enter income both annually and per month. And I think that's a really handy feature, especially if you're just running a quick number. When you're using these guideline worksheets, I think a lot of questions that I get stem from the fact that users have incorrectly entered information or perhaps have forgotten to enter information into the guideline worksheet. And if you look at the statute of the guidelines, there's definitely an order of operations that you are to follow. And and that's the way these worksheets are organized. So if you follow the order of operations, almost invariably, you're going to get the correct result. So, I just start at the very top, the style of the case. Again, I hit quick consult. So that's the name of the case. If I wanted to change that, I could very easily do that. Just do Smith case, worksheet of, I'll say father. Or you can see here that VADER has defaulted to husband or wife. You do have the option of calling the parties by their first names or by mother and father, or whatever you want. So I'm going to say this is the worksheet of the husband. And then, again, following the order of operations, just go down and make sure that you're entering the information so you're not leaving anything out. If I could type. Okay, client name. And then gross income of wife, let's put her in at $35,000 a year. Husband, let's put him in at say $48,000 a year. All right, are there any kids involved? In this particular case, sure. Let's say that there are 2. Ages of, you may as well fill in that information to make sure you're not missing anything. And then a lot of times people step over, they gloss over this next step. Make sure that the spousal support payor is appropriately designated. If you wanted to see whether the wife owed a liability to the husband, you just switch that. But in this case, because the husband is making more per month or per year rather, see, I made a mistake right here. I put 48,000 a month.
Dan, but I didn't know if you were doing it on purpose.
Yeah, no,
We all do that.
Yeah, we all do it. And if you're getting a result that's like, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense, go back and look at what you did, because as you can see, I just screwed that up. All right, so he makes 48,000 per year. 2 kids. If amount of spousal support is already known. All right, why is that here? Well, if you have negotiated the amount of spousal support with opposing counsel and you don't need the worksheet to calculate it for you, that's where you would enter in that number, and VADER will use that number. All right, information related to child support. Okay, again, this is this is somewhat aggravating, and I know it aggravates me. This combined support worksheet assumes that you are not in a shared custody situation. The combined support worksheet assumes that one party has primary physical custody of the children. Okay, so you got to go down here and make sure that the custodian is appropriate. I put it in as the wife, so it defaults to the payer of child support as the husband. Again, if child support is already known, if you've already negotiated the child support amount, you want to figure out what spousal support is going to be, you can do that here. Work-related child care. All right. Healthcare premium. Let's say the wife covers that. Support of other children. This is an important step. Does either party have a child or children not of this particular marriage? If so, and there is an existing court order that requires child support to those children, that's the number that you put in. If there is no existing court order, if father has a child that is not involved in this particular litigation, but the child lives with him, the statute says that the father gets a deduction from his gross income in the presumptive amount of child support for that kid based only on the husband's income. So VADER will do that calculation for you. Okay, is there any self-employment tax? If so, you're going to want to include that. Number of persons in husband's household. Okay, this is for the poverty guidelines deviation factor. If a party if paying support would leave them at or below 150% of the federal poverty guideline in terms of monthly income, that is a deviation factor for the court to consider. So if you're dealing with a lower income case, bear in mind that the federal poverty guidelines come into play, because if they're below that 150% threshold, the court may use it as a deviation factor and say, all right, look, I know that the guideline says that you have to pay $150 per month. I don't think, given your income, you're going to be able to meet your own reasonable needs based on that. So we're going to give you a deviation and reduce that $150 a month. All right, then finally, counsel information, you would want to fill that in. All right, and once you've done that, then you should be able to click on, because you've done the basic information sheet, you should be able to click on any of these other sheets and have that information carry through. So I'm clicking on the child support only. Okay, yeah, and it's carried through the information from the other sheets. All right, if I wanted to use the combined support sheet, I don't think based on the incomes that I use that there's going to be any alimony payable, but sometimes I'm surprised. So let's see what this says.
And Dan, while you're on the combined support
Yes.
worksheet, we do have a question from Amy Inge. She says, the combined support worksheet seems to only be applicable to situations where one party has sole custody because there is not an area for the number of days that each party has the children. Is this accurate?
That is accurate. That's right. That's one of the drawbacks of the combined support worksheet, is that it presumes that one party has primary physical custody of the children. So if you're going to use that sheet, You can still use this sheet for presentation purposes, but if you have a shared custody situation, what you need to do is go to the shared custody sheet, and then calculate the shared child support, and then you start, it starts to get a little bit difficult because, well, how do you calculate shared support if you don't know what the spousal support is going to be? All right, you have to do spousal support first, before you do the child support calculation. So what you would do in that situation, if you've got a shared custody arrangement, first thing you would do is go and determine what the spousal support is going to be. And then once you figure out what the presumptive spousal support paid from one party to the other, then you go over to the shared custody sheet, you input that information, and then you figure out child support. So you always do alimony first, child support second. And that's going to apply to any of these worksheets. So for example, we have these worksheets that cover mixed custody situations, right? We amended the Virginia Code to take into account lots of different custodial arrangements. Why did we do that? Because the judges down in Newport News said, look, we've got all these situations where we've got, 3 kids in a family and they're all shared different numbers of days. Okay, so that's where we come up with multiple shared, where you have a situation where there's more than one kid and they're all being shared different numbers of days. You use the multiple shared guideline. If you've got a situation where there is at least one kid involved, where one parent has primary custody of that child, but maybe they're sharing custody of 2 other kids, okay, we can cover that now. We would use the sole shared guideline. If you've got a situation where each of the parents has primary custody of at least one kid, but they're sharing custody of a 3rd or a 4th or a 5th kid, all right, that's a split shared situation. So those particular situations, the biggies are primary custody, shared custody, split custody, and then underneath that, you've got these 3 guidelines that sort of give you some, a little more nuance to it, if that makes sense. So all of those are covered in VADER. All right, let me go back to basic information. And I'm hoping that you're going to be able to see as my computer does this. I don't know that you will, but if you want to see what this sheet looks like printed out, you hit this print button over here. And Donna, I'm going to rely on you and have you tell me if you can see. Just bear with me 1 second. I need to move some things here. Can you see the worksheet, Donna? Okay, good. All right, so this, when you hit that print button, this is going to show you what this worksheet looks like, okay? Now, in its current form, you can't do much with it. And this is one of the big complaints that we get about VADER is that with the old Excel version, you could put in your own formulas, you could cross-reference, you could edit it. Well, you can't do that. The complaint is with VADER because as it's constituted now, because all you get is this thing and you can't edit it. All right, I'm going to stop my screen sharing for just a moment because I want to show you something else. So when you get to this page, you're going to hit that download button, okay? And that's going to save this to your computer. All right, that'll save the print page to your computer. All right, and I'm going to save this as, let's see, I'll save it as a VADER example. And I don't know if you can see the box that came up, but you can. Okay, good. So this is being saved. Again, I mentioned earlier, this is getting saved to my downloads. All right, VADER example, and now it's in PDF format. Okay. I'm going to stop screen sharing because I need to get into my other screen here. All right. Now, those of you who have an updated version of Adobe, all right, do you see this, the worksheet now? All right, this is a tip I want to give everybody. So, so the complaint again is that you can't manipulate these worksheets. All right. That's not exactly true. If you have updated Adobe software, you can fully manipulate these worksheets as much as you want. All right. So on mine, I've now pulled up the combined support worksheet in PDF format, and I can click Edit PDF. And you can see here that I have full access to manipulating any part of this document that I want. So let's say that I want to call this combined worksheet for mom. Well, I can just add that. Okay. If I want to say this is support scenario 1, mom at 35,000, I can do that. If I want to highlight, if there's something weird about mom's income and I want to highlight that, I can do that. And this is for presentation to the court purposes, right? I mean, you take full advantage of the ability to highlight things, take full advantage of the opportunity to, for example, drop a footnote. I want to say, hey, I want to make sure that that adjusted gross income, I want to say at the very bottom of this sheet that, assumes dad is working full-time. Okay, you can do all those things in PDF. Now, what I'm sure Mike is going to want me to tell you, I'm going to stop sharing here. What I'm sure Mike is going to want me to tell you, because he worked very hard on getting this together for us. And now I got to go back to where I was. Okay. So in VADER Online, you do have this notes feature here at the very bottom of the screen. If you want to put a footnote in here, say assumes mom is working full time, okay, you can do that. All right, so when VADER has a notes function, so you can enter notes at the very bottom, and then when you go to print it, see, you'll see at the bottom that it prints out those notes. Okay, I find that in presenting these materials to the court, it's very helpful to be able to draw the court's attention to various figures, or if I want to title it so that I can keep the exhibits straight. The whole goal is to make it as straightforward as possible when you're presenting it to the court, or where you're presenting it to the mediator, or you're presenting it to opposing counsel. So just bear in mind that you really do have the ability to manipulate the document once you've downloaded it and then brought it back up in PDF format. If you want to drop footnotes, you can use that notes function. Okay. So again, I know that I'm kind of blowing through all of this, and if there are questions, again, I want Donna and Mike to interrupt me so I can get to them. But basically, you've got your pretty straightforward support worksheets here on the left-hand side. You've got your mixed custody guidelines. The more difficult issues are here. For those of you who may not be familiar with it, remember that you've got this interim arrears worksheet, so that if mom filed her case on January 1 of this year, and you're getting into court June 15th, and dad should have been paying support the entire time, well, how much does he owe mom? Well, you can use the interim arrears worksheet to figure that out. All you have to do is enter the guideline number, say $350 a month. Well, paid to mom. Boy, I'm having real trouble typing this morning. All right, $350 a month. What's the date mom filed her petition? What's the date you're actually in court? Okay, VADER will calculate the arrears for that interval. And if dad has been making payments to mom, maybe he's paid a total of $600. You want to give him credit for that, you can do that. Okay, total amount due. Now, do you want interest? Now, I don't think, my own personal opinion is, I do not think the law is clear on whether you get interest on that for the PL period, for the period of time from the date of filing until the date of the hearing, but VADER allows you to apply interest or not apply interest. And if you're the one that's seeking the interim arrearage, you may as well ask for it. So apply interest, all right? Okay, so those are the basic support worksheets. And that's really what you're going to be spending the most time on, I think, in VADER. Now, the other function, as I said earlier, is that VADER allows you to trace separate interests in marital property. So let's look at that for a bit. So I'm going to collapse the support, and we're going to go to ED forms. Okay. ED funds are the worksheets that allow you to calculate the separate and marital interest. This ED form sheet is for presentation purposes. So you're going to use ED forms if you've got an equitable distribution coming up and you want to show, what's their personal property. You want to list all that. You would list that on the personal property sheet. If you want to show whether they have business interests, you would list that on it's right up here. If you want to show that there are businesses involved, you would list that on the business property schedule. So these are just presentation schedules under ED forms. So remember the word form, it's not going to be doing calculations for you. Now, if you want to do calculations, you click on ED funds. And that brings you to our fabulous Brandenburg calculation. That's the one that most of us are familiar with. And here it's called SOF, or source of funds calculation, but what that really means is Brandenburg. So let's go there. My computer's just taking a moment to load. In the meantime, I'm going to clear all this stuff from the bottom of my screen. Okay. So equitable distribution of hybrid property using the Brandenburg rule. That is the source of funds calculation. One thing that I notice when advising people when they call in on the Brandenburg sheet, I'll make 2 points on this. First point is the number one error that I see made is that people are using the cost of improvements as a contribution rather than the value of those improvements to the property. You cannot get credit under Brandenburg if you spent $30,000 modifying a bathroom. You would need to have an appraiser come in and say, okay, well, what would the value of that house be without the modification? What would the value be with the modification? And so we spent a lot of time arguing about, yeah, I know that you dumped $50,000 into this reno, but unless you have an appraiser that's going to come in and be able to testify convincingly that the property has increased in value because of that reno and by how much, you're not going to be able to get credit for it under Brandenburg. So that's something that I see a lot with users. The other thing that I see is users using this property refinance sheet. Okay, so what is that? All right, Brandenburg basically allocates equity in marital real estate based on respective contributions of separate property and marital property. And the question arises, okay, well, what happens if we have a piece of property and there's a separate contribution and there are marital contributions, but then we pull out some of that equity in a refinance, and maybe we buy a car with it. Maybe we pay down marital debt with it. Maybe we use the equity to purchase another piece of property. Okay, how do you account for that? Now, years and years ago, Dick Bird, who was the original creator of VADER, demonstrated that mathematically, you can't pull out that equity and assume that it has no impact on the Brandenburg calculation. And his theory was, when you pull out that equity in a refinance, the contributions that have been made before that refinance, some of them are getting paid back. So if you pull $100,000 out of the marital residence in a refinance. Well, some of that $100,000 is separate. Some of that $100,000 is marital. And if you're just putting it in a joint account, you're repaying some of that separate contribution to, let's say the wife contributed separate property when they purchased the resident. Well, she's getting paid back for some of that separate contribution. And then the marriage is getting paid back for some of its contribution. And what that does, and it's kind of beyond the scope of this presentation to give you the numbers themselves, but what it does is it changes the percentage contributions going forward. And so that's what this property refinance sheet does, is every time you pull money out of equity, it's going to reallocate those percentages. So a couple points on this. You do not need to use this property refinance sheet unless you are pulling money out of the house. If you are just doing a refinance to get a better rate, or the only money that you're really pulling out of the house at refinance is just to cover the closing costs, don't bother with the refinance sheet. 9 times out of 10, when people contact me about how to use this sheet, and it's not putting out the correct numbers, my first question is, okay, well, how much are you, what is the input variable for the amount of money that you have taken out? And they say, well, they didn't take out any money. Okay, well, then you don't need to use the refinance sheet. Again, only use that property refinance sheet if they are taking out, more than a couple $1,000s of equity at the time of the refinance. And if they do that on a habitual basis, I guess you don't, now that I think about it, I used to use this sheet a lot more than I do now. It seems that the parties aren't taking out as much equity. I don't know whether that's because they've tightened up the lending rules or whatever, but after 08, you didn't see as much of that going on. If you use this property refinance sheet in court, bear in mind, the Court of Appeals has not explicitly authorized this methodology to account for refinances. This is Dick Bird's mathematical sort of theory for how it ought to operate. So if you're ever going to present this in court, email me and I will email you the multi-page explanation that Dick Bird gives and demonstrates why mathematically you have to use this refinance sheet. Okay, so enough. Yes.
I'm so sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead.
We have about 5 minutes left until 11, and we do have a question from Judge Schell, and I was hoping that you might be able to get to that before the end of the presentation.
Hit me. What is it?
The question is how to divide marital, quote, marital property. Is 100% to one party the best default, or is 50% more appropriate? And I didn't know if maybe Judge Schell if you need more of an explanation from him, or if that's good for you.
Well, I'm going to hazard a guess that the judge is referring, and we may need some clarification, that the judge is referring to the worksheet itself.
Yes, look under how to divide marital portion.
Yes.
It defaults to 100%, and the reality might be that it's not 100% when you get a decision from the judge.
You would hope not. I mean, you would have to really, really screw up as a party if if the other side was getting 100% of the marital property. No, you're absolutely right that and this is one of those things that you have to make sure that as you're going through the chart, you've accounted for, because in this particular case, if you wanted to do an equal distribution of the marital share, you would just do 50-50. If there's a factor that, if you want to argue that the property should be divided unequally insofar as the marital portion is concerned, type in whatever portion you're going to be arguing for, and then VADER will default to the other percentage for the other percentage of the marital portion. And again, user tip, this only refers to the marital portion. VADER will tell you, under Brandenburg, how much of this equity is separate and therefore off the table for division by the court, how much of it is marital, and how do you want to divide the marital portion. So that's a very good
I would respectfully suggest that perhaps the default ought to be changed to 50-50 to avoid mistakes in the future.
I think that respectful suggestion ought to be implemented, and I'm going to charge my colleague Mike Mike Maschke with talking to our programmers about that, because yeah, I could see where, you know, if you're doing especially if you're doing a quick and dirty, this is going to throw off numbers that are a little bit skewed on
We'll
that.
get that taken care of, Dan.
All right, perfect. Okay, one other sheet that I want to show you. I know there are, and Donna, maybe what I'll do, are there questions that you think are pressing that I should address before we wrap up?
Well, we don't have any pending in the chat box, but I will
good.
tell you this, Dan. I think that I feel like we've kind of scratched the surface. So the Prince William County Bar Association may reach out to you to do another hour, maybe just on the ED sheets.
Right.
Because I think we did a really good job with the child support section.
Mm-hmm.
But the ED sheets, you know, I practiced for a while, and, you know, the years of experience that are on this call is pretty fantastic. But sometimes the ED sheets can be overwhelming. So we might charge you for that. If you could give us, I mean, we started about 10 minutes late.
Mm-hmm.
So if people have the time and there are just a few things you would like to touch on, unless we get questions, I think that would be great.
I'd be happy to do that. And so let me say, you know, we've talked about source of funds, which is Brandenburg. We've talked about property refinance, which, you know, beware, you may not necessarily need that one. What other ones are you typically going to be using? If you have an account that was started during the marriage, but after separation, there were separate contributions, use the marital funds worksheet. Okay. That's a simpler worksheet. If there's no premarital component, typically you're talking about retirement accounts or brokerage accounts. If the account was created during the marriage, but you want to argue for post-separation credit for separate contributions, use the marital funds worksheet, because you see right here, it starts you off with the balance of the account on the date of separation. So that's an easier sheet to use. You don't have to worry about what contributions were made during the marriage. You don't have to worry about what were the premarital contributions. If you're only focused on credit for post-separation contributions, use the marital fund sheet. If now you have a more complex asset, if it was created prior to the marriage, use the general funds worksheet. And you can see that in the general funds worksheet, it accounts for premarital contributions to the account. It accounts for contributions to the account during the marriage. And then it also gives you the opportunity to account for post-separation contributions. Okay. That is a very data intensive worksheet. And I don't know what about you all, but what I'm finding over time as the banks consolidate, as the different investment and brokerage houses consolidate, particularly with a longer term marriage, you know, a marriage of more than 10 years, it's getting harder and harder, unless the parties are pack rats. It's getting harder and harder to get the companies to give you the information. And I have to tell you, just as a practice tip, I recently subpoenaed Vanguard to do exactly this chart. And you know, we called them and said, well, where do you want us to send the subpoena? And they told us, and it was a nightmare trying to get them to give us the information that we wanted. They said, you know, it's overbroad. And of course it's overbroad. I'm asking for information back for 15 years because I have to do this calculation, and they objected to it. And they, you know, you could only communicate with them in writing, and it took weeks and weeks and weeks. And they said, okay, we're producing this, but we're still maintaining our objection, including that it wasn't properly served. And I just got the distinct impression that maybe these houses are taking the position that they're not going to comply with this stuff anymore. I mean, you attorneys can issue your subpoenas, but you know, it seemed to me they were making it more difficult than it needed to be. So I wanted to share that experience with you, just as a word to the wise, as you're looking for those documents to go back that far. Okay.
Dan,
options. Yes.
You have a question in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
we got two questions. Dan, one, scrolling up a little bit from Alexandra Bowen. She's talking about looking for a way to save a guideline worksheet so she can change one data point and not have to re-enter all of the data all over again. And I believe you were demonstrating that when you were actually printing, when you print the worksheet with your current scenario, you have the ability to change a variable and reprint it to a PDF and save it as a different name, scenario 1 versus scenario 2. But if you are coming back to work on the case at a later point in time, you can't upload your case file and your data should be there.
That's right. I mean, you have to be careful. Like, when I was showing you, when you open the document in PDF format, you can manipulate the document, you can make changes to it, but those changes are not going to be visible if you were to re-upload the case into VADER. You're just changing a document in PDF. To answer that specific question, if you're going to change a variable to the guideline, the best way to do it, download, once you've done working on the case, download the case information. And then if you want to go back in and just change the wife's income, for example, re-upload the case and just change that variable. And then VADER will recalculate it for you. I mean, I guess in theory, you could change it when you're in PDF, but then if you're changing the income, that's going to impact the calculation. So, just changing it on PDF is not going to allow the VADER program to recalculate the guideline numbers for you.
Exactly. And you could also, if you're doing on the same screen, you could put the wife's gross income in, have it run as calculation, print that to PDF as scenario 1, then change or up or lessen the gross income and print that same page to PDF as scenario 2.
That's right.
To get to the two representations.
That's exactly right.
And then we have a question about printing from Mr. Baldwin. How can I make it so that the worksheets print out with a margin around each side? And what you'll have to do, Mr. Baldwin, is once that Acrobat PDF file is saved on your computer, if you double click on it and it opens up in Adobe Acrobat, you will actually have to reprint that file. So if you go to File, Print, within the PDF printer settings, you can scale the screen from 100% to 95 or 90 to get you the margin size that you need. But that will be on a setting that you will have to do manually and is not available through the VADER online website.
And that's Mike, sounds like when somebody at my firm asks me a question about VADER, my default answer is play around with it until you get it right. So he might give a very detailed answer, but a lot of times it is sort of like play around with it until you sort of get the result that you want. Okay, last thing I want to show you, this options worksheet. If you have property in your case where you need to apply the coverture fraction, if there's a vesting schedule involved, you can use this options worksheet, and the options worksheet will calculate the marital shares of any asset that has a vesting schedule. Now, we do not see options as much as we used to, but what we do see quite a bit now are these restricted stock units. Somebody's granted 100 shares of restricted stock, and that stock vests over time. Well, you can calculate using the coverture fraction what the separate and what the marital and what the hybrid portion of those RSUs is, if you know the number of RSUs that were granted. Let's say that it was 100 and they were granted on May 1st. And the vesting period, it's a 36-month vesting period. Let me see here. Just make sure that and then you got to make sure, because you're calculating separate and marital shares, that you've got a separation date. Let's say that the party separated in August. Okay. Did I do that right? Let's see, grant date. I'm going to make this bigger. Here we go. So let's say that there were 100 shares granted. They were granted on, I'll do an earlier date, January 3rd of 2021. There's a 36-month vesting period. Okay, This sheet will calculate the number of marital shares versus separate shares based on that separation date and based on the vesting period. So if you've got RSUs and you're trying to figure out, all right, how do I apply the coverture fraction to that? The options worksheet will let you do it. All right, I have talked nonstop at 1,000 miles an hour. I'm sorry that we went so quickly, and I always give the short shrift to things that people are interested in, but there's a lot of material to cover. So happy to answer any last questions or anything else that anybody has before we break off.
I'm watching the chat. I'm getting a lot of thank yous. I imagine I'm also going to get a lot of Dan, when can you come back? And so thank you for being open to that. I think VADER is such a great program, but it is a little overwhelming. It's certainly the transition from the, part that I downloaded, years ago with a CD onto my desktop. So this new version is a difficult transition, but it has great features.
Yeah. Donna, and I'll say this also, that if if we want to do another presentation and people have specific scenarios that they want to run using the program, or perhaps I can come up with some specific scenarios, like only using the property distribution worksheets or only using the support worksheets, happy to do that too. And if anybody has questions, feel free to call or email me at any time.
Thank you so much, Dan. All right, well, I think we are at 11:09. So I think we're going to go ahead and end the call to everyone. Thank you for joining the Prince William County Bar Association coffee hour. We try to do these once a month to give some great information to our bar members. Both Mike and Dan, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the participants, and we will sign off.
Thank you.
Thank you.